Hi guys, happy Tuesday. Time for my version of our fireside chat, just like FDR. So today, this video is going to be going over the New Deal Relief, Recovery, and Reform Acts. So these are the most important things that you need to know from the New Deal. We'll talk about the acts today. As you can see in your book, you have a nice little graph about all of them on page 199. So you're going to need to do that because I posted a graphic organizer that you can either fill out if you can figure out a way to upload it or whatever, or you can create your own graphic organizer. All right. So I'm going to start on page 198. The New Deal in Action: Relief, Recovery, and Reform. Roosevelt's program to combat the problems caused by the Depression was called the New Deal. The programs of the New Deal had the following goals: relief for those people who were suffering, recovery for the economy so it could grow again, reform measures to avoid future depressions. Remember, reform means to change. Relief legislation of the New Deal. Congress passed a wide range of relief legislation as part of the New Deal. Emergency Banking Act, 1933. Roosevelt's first act as president was to close the nation's banks by declaring a bank holiday in order to stop the collapse of the national banking system. So basically everybody was like running to the banks and taking out all their money. And so then the banks had no money. Banks were closing left and right, which was really hurting the economy. So Roosevelt closed them. Federal government went in to see what was going on and would not reopen them until they could guarantee people's money. All right? Says the time was used to assure the public that it could have confidence in the banks once they reopened. The law required the examination of banks to ensure that only financially sound banks were operating. In the same month, Roosevelt began to take the United States off the gold standard. So we no longer use gold to back up our money. Federal Emergency Relief Act, 1933. Between 1933 and 1935, some $500,000 was provided for distribution by states and cities for direct relief and work projects for hungry, homeless, and unemployed people. So they gave money to these to the states and to the cities to help people. Public Works Administration, the PWA, 1933. Operating from 1933 until 1939, the PWA provided jobs through construction projects such as bridges, housing, hospitals, schools, and aircraft carriers. The PWA also moved government money into the economy. It was hoped that this pump priming would create jobs, revive production, and lead to more consumer spending. Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, 1933. Between 1933 and 1942, the CCC provided work for 2.5 million young men ages 18 to 25 conserving natural resources. So they would work like in the state parks. They would make sure, remember, natural resources are things like trees, lakes, coal, and then conserving means to save. So they're saving a lot of our natural parks. Only 8,000 young women joined the CCC. Works Progress Administration, WPA, 1935. From 1935 until 1943, the WPA provided jobs for 25% of adult Americans. The agency was created to replace direct relief with public works projects. The WPA spent more government money than any other program. While WPA workers built roads, bridges, airports, public buildings, playgrounds, and golf courses, the program also offered work to writers, artists, musicians, scholars, and actors. Critics, so people that didn't like it, attacked the cultural work projects in particular. Others criticized the WPA for being inequitable, so not equal. With WPA employment limited to one member of the family, only women who were heads of households were eligible for WPA jobs. However, the WPA provided jobs for over 8.5 million people who left a legacy in books, works of art, and public buildings, bridges, tunnels, and stadiums still in use today. Recovery legislation of the New Deal. Congress also passed a wide range of recovery legislation as part of the New Deal. So remember, recovery is trying to get the economy working again. National Industrial Recovery Act 1933. The National Recovery Administration, NRA, had the authority to work with businesses to help them recover. The NRA set codes of fair competition within industries to maintain prices, minimum wages, and maximum hours. The public was encouraged to buy from companies that followed the NRA codes. The NRA was not popular, however. Some consumers complained that the NRA plan raised prices. Companies opposed the provisions giving unions the right to organize. Small companies felt at disadvantage compared to larger companies. The NIRA was declared unconstitutional in 1935. So tomorrow, we're going to talk more about the challenges that the New Deal face. Homeowners Loan Corporation, 1933. This agency was created to help homeowners save their houses from foreclosure. Foreclosure means that you didn't pay your mortgage, and so the government and the bank is going to take your house from you. It provided funds to pay off mortgages and financed over 1 million new long-term mortgages at lower fixed interest rates. First Agricultural Adjustment Act. The aim of the AAA was to raise farmers' income by cutting the amount of surplus crops and livestock. So if you remember, we talked about how farmers were really hurting during the Great Depression. They kept growing food, raising cattle, and people weren't buying it. So the farmers were really struggling during this time. So the AAA is going to help them. In that way, farmers would be able to sell their crops at the same prices of the years 1909 to 1914, a time when farm prices were high. The government paid farmers for reducing the number of acres they planted. So instead of the farmer planting 10 acres, now maybe they're planting 5 acres. But the government is going to supplement that income. So instead of earning $100 by planting 10 acres, now they might only earn $50 by planting 5 acres, but the government is going to make up for that. So they're still making the same money. Get it? Okay. The plan was financed through a processing tax on companies that made the wheat, corn, cotton, hogs, milk, and tobacco into consumer products. Large farmers, rather than small farmers and tenant farmers, benefited from the AAA. The public was outraged at the destruction of crops and animals in order to keep production down. However, farm prices did increase. Although the AAA was declared unconstitutional in 1936, the principle of the farm price supports had been established. The AAA was replaced with a law that encouraged using soil conservation methods. So now we've seen 2 laws or acts that were declared unconstitutional. Federal Housing Administration, FHA. The FHA was created by the National Housing Act to insure bank mortgages. These mortgages were often for 20 to 30 years and at down payments of only 10%. Second Agricultural Adjustment Act, 1938. The second AAA was passed in response to the drop in farm prices in 1938. The government paid farmers to store portions of overproduced crops until the price reached the level of prices from 1909 to 1914. In spite of New Deal efforts, America's farmers did not regain prosperity until the 1940s, when World War II brought increased demand for food. Reform. Remember, reform means to change. Reform legislation of the New Deal. Congress also passed a wide range of reform legislation as part of the New Deal. Glass-Steagall Banking Act. This banking act aimed at restoring and maintaining stability in the national economy. It created the Federal Deposit Incorporation, FDIC, which if you go into the banks today, on the bottom of on the door, they usually have a gold square sticker, and it says the FDIC on there. Okay, so the FDIC is super duper important. This Banking Act created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, which guaranteed individual bank deposits up to $5,000, an amount that had increased up to $100,000 by 2008. In 2009, Congress temporarily raised the insurance coverage for a depositor per bank up to $250,000. So if you deposit $250,000 into a bank, you're guaranteed your money, even if the bank fails. If you put in $300,000, you might lose $50,000 if the bank fails. Okay. The Glass-Steagall Act separated investment banks from commercial ones, prohibiting commercial banks from involvement in securities markets. In 1999, Congress repealed this portion of the law. The Glass-Steagall Act also increased the power of the Federal Reserve Board so that it had more control over speculation on credit. Whew. Wake up, Miss Oberacker. Securities Exchange Act, 1934. Created to promote economic stability, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, has the authority to regulate stock exchanges and investment advisors. The SEC powers include the right to bring action against those found practicing fraud, like Martha Stewart or Joe Giudice. I don't know about Joe Giudice, but Martha Stewart definitely got put in prison because of the SEC. The SEC could require financial information about stocks and bonds before they were sold. Social Security Act of 1935. This is one of the ones that you need to know about, okay? The 1935 Social Security Act was a combination of public assistance and insurance. The law had three main parts. One, it provided old age insurance, so insurance for senior citizens, paid by a tax on both the employer and employee while the employee was working. So those of you that get a paycheck, you'll see Social Security tax on there. And you put money into it, but then when you turn 65, or you can collect it at 62 right now, you get all that money back. Okay? The worker and employee, not the government, funded this part of Social Security. 2, it provided unemployment insurance for workers paid by employers. 3, it gave assistance to dependent children and to the elderly, ill, and handicapped. So this is where a lot of our public assistance programs came from. National Labor Relations Act, the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act, named for its author, New York State Senator Robert Wagner, guaranteed labor the right to form unions and to practice collective bargaining. It created the National Labor Relations Board to ensure that elections to select unions were conducted fairly. The NLRB could also stop practices such as blacklisting made illegal by this law. Fair Labor Standards Act. This law, also called the Wages and Hours Act, set a minimum wage, originally 25 cents an hour, and a maximum work week, originally 44 hours, for workers in industry involved in interstate commerce. The law also banned child labor in interstate commerce. It is one of many examples of New Deal legislation passed using the power given to Congress to regulate interstate commerce. So interstate commerce is when people trade in between states. Okay. All right, the New Deal and organized labor. Roosevelt was interested in helping workers primarily through social legislation, such as Social Security. He also wanted to work cooperatively with businesses as seen in the NRA legislation. When the NRA was ruled unconstitutional, and with it the part that ensured labor the right to form unions, Roosevelt turned to the Wagner Act as a means of aiding labor. By 1935, he had turned away from business and saw organized labor unions as a force in society that would balance the power of big business. So he was pro-labor unions. Okay? This pro-labor attitude of the New Deal resulted in an increase in union membership of more than 1.5 million members between 1933 and 1935. After the Wagner Act became law in 1935, membership grew another 3 million. By 1938, it had reached 7 million organized workers. These gains took place during a split within organized labor over how to unionize workers. The American Federation of Labor, the AFL, who we talked about before, whose craft unions of skilled workers had dominated the labor movement since 1886, was challenged for control by a new union organized by industry. These new unions organized all workers, skilled and unskilled. The boss is talking. In a given industry such as textiles, coal, steel, and automobiles, much like the old Knights of Labor. But unlike the Knights, industrial unions concentrate on bread and butter issues of wages, hours, and working conditions. Led by John L. Lewis, head of the United Mine Workers, the new industrial unions formed the Committee for Industrial Organization within the AFL. In 1937, the CIO became a separate union, the Congress of Industrialized Organizations. In addition to the way it organized workers, the CIO differed from the AFL because its members included women, African Americans, and immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. These groups made up a large percentage of unskilled workforce that comprised the CIO unions. Despite their differences, the two organizations merged to form the powerful AFL-CIO. The 1930s were marked by a series of bitter strikes as the CIO attempted to unionize large industries, including the steel and automobile industries. Union workers demanded that companies enter into collective bargaining. Often, police and company-paid guards used force against strikers. The workers made effective use of the sit-down strike, a tactic in which they remained in the plant but refused to work until their demands were met. So, that covers the PowerPoint that I put up. Remember, if you choose to do the PowerPoint questions, you still have to do the other things like I want both of you guys, I want the readers and the PowerPoint people to do the questions on page, what is it? I think it's like 189. Yep, page 189. So probably on Thursday, I'm going to go over those. So I have given you guys a lot of work. Tomorrow, I don't think I'm going to post really any new assignments because I want to give you guys a chance to get all these done. So, I probably will post something tomorrow. But maybe I'll give you guys Thursday off. And then for the next section, for Unit 6, we're going to do something a little bit differently, okay? If you have any questions, make sure that you contact me. And make sure that you also join my new Facebook page. Facebook name, Oberacker.